Hello everybody, welcome to Aftermath, where we discuss my thoughts on the game and the impact it's had on me after playing it on the channel. As always, you can find the playthrough on the channel and there will be a link to that at the end of this video. Today we're discussing Hellblade. This is an indie title with very ambitious graphical presentation, so let's discuss Senua's journey into madness and redemption. As always, we're gonna discuss gameplay, graphics and sound first, and then my personal experience with the game. So the gameplay is comprised of three elements. The first one being a walking simulator type deal where you're exploring the different areas, each with its own distinctive tinge and ambience to it. And the voices in your head will be guiding you through these areas and essentially commentating on them.
There's no doubt about it. The source of the darkness is in Helheim. And the goddess Hela holds his soul there.
So the next piece of gameplay is the visual puzzle segments. These were consistently the low point for me in the game. Essentially what you're doing here is trying to locate different visual patterns in the landscape. However, there are issues where the game won't recognize that you have located these. They can be tricky sometimes, and overall they just felt redundant and not needed. And so the last piece of gameplay is of course combat. For me, the animations felt very fluid and cinematic and brought the visual presentation to a pretty high standard in these segments. I'll also say the keyboard and mouse controls worked very well for me, even though I usually go for a gamepad in these types of games. However, there are some issues with the combat. The camera doesn't always collaborate, and that's an understatement. And you do tend to get stuck in corners occasionally, giving for some very frustrating moments. The fights also grow lengthier towards the end of the game, and that coupled with the limited variety of enemies gave for a very boring experience at times. There are also times where the game will start throwing endless waves of the same dudes at you, and you just at that point want to scream at the devs and tell them, hey, you're not making the game more difficult by doing this, you're just making it less enjoyable right now. I will say, however, that that feeling of frustration did allow me to empathize with Senua and solidified her feeling of struggle that she herself was going through. I don't know if that was the intention of the devs, but it did work out that way for me in the end. So let's move on to graphics, and here's where all the good stuff really starts for me. This is a mind-blowing graphical experience with incredible landscapes, water and rain effects, as well as very detailed facial animations for Senua, incredible acting on her part, I must say. Overall, great graphical presentation. One of the things that the devs got right, in my opinion, is how well reality and hallucinations mesh in at all times, and you find yourself constantly wondering what is real, what is not, what is a figment of Senua's imagination. All of that stuff is really well done. Lighting also deserves a special mention here. Not only is it excellent generally throughout the areas, but there are some places where you're carrying a torch around and that is the only source of light that really serves to solidify that feeling of dread and fear. As a final note, I'll say I was able to almost lock it at 60 FPS 1080p using my R9 290 AMD card. So moving on to sound, this was actually excellent. Now this is a game that uses binaural sound to really immerse you in the experience of having voices in your head and everything around you having special meaning.
No! You're not taking it from me!
I warn you, Senua. I can smell your...
No!
You betrayed your gods.
I am leaving with him!
You turned your back on me.
And so you really owe it to yourself to play this with headphones to make the most out of that stereo experience. And the voice acting here is just top notch. I was consistently impressed with Senua's performance, as well as most of the other NPCs, to be honest. The other thing that was really well done was the mixing. Now this is something you might take for granted, but in a game like this, the volume of each voice actually carries meaning with it, meaning some of the voices that you hear louder, you should pay more attention to them, whereas some of the others are just inner dialogue. Now, while some games might accept running tap water as a decent rain effect sound sample, that's not the case in here. I was consistently impressed by the rain effects, and not only that, but this has some of the best lightning sounds I've ever heard in a video game. Now to talk a bit about the music. Now this shines in two aspects. by its presence and by its absence. What I mean by that is that it knows when to not be there. Those times when you only have environmental sounds, just the waves crashing against the shore with that amazing graphical presentation. And then it knows when to swell up when there's an emotional moment. It hits those notes. It's an amazing combination of things happening to just deliver you that emotional state. Getting some goosebumps here with the music. And the last thing I want to mention here is there's this awesome segment where you rely on audio cues to navigate an area, and that's super interesting and something I haven't seen done in games a whole lot. So moving on to my actual experience with the game, taking all of the prior into account, this was actually a very deep and immersive experience. Even though the combat was frustrating at times and the game kept sending waves and waves of enemies at me, this actually served to elevate my connection with the character, since she herself is going through this same thing where she's trying to break through just a barrage of obstacles and enemies. Overall, it was an interesting story and I was engaged in it as the mysteries gradually unveiled themselves. By the end, there's this tangible feeling of conquest, and you can't help yourself get a little bit emotional when that final theme song kicks in. As you may know, I like ranking games according to the urgency with which you gotta play them. Things like numerical system values or money are always gonna be subjective to people, but time is a commodity that we all share, and a limited amount of free time is a constraint that most of us have. And so, is this game worth investing your limited free time right now? Next up, when you can, or don't even bother. So this is a when you get a chance title for me. You're not getting this for the combat, you're not getting it for the puzzles, you're getting it for an immersive, interesting story. If that sounds up your alley, by all means go pick it up and check it out. Maybe check out my playthrough on the channel. And as always, thanks for watching. Catch you next time.